Cincinnati audiences are Cincinnati audiences are so obedient. I love it. Are we on a mic? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It is delightful to see a full room. Sorry for the extra time shuffling chairs, but we're happy that everybody is where they need to be. I'm Nathaniel Stein. I'm the curator of photography at the Cincinnati Art Museum, where it is my pleasure to open the exhibition Discovering Ansel Adams with my colleague Rebecca Senf from the Center for Creative Photography and with all of you. Every 2 years, I get to be delighted when organizational calendars align such that the museum's fall photography show also serves as the opening weekend kickoff for the Photo Focus Biennial. So on behalf of the museum, I want to say thank you to Photo Focus for their generous, great Photo Focus. For their support of this exhibition and for their platforming of the exhibition within the biennial. I also want to say how glad I am about the real traction that emerged this year between the goals of our exhibition and the biennial theme, and folks from Photo Focus know that museum planning timelines and biennial planning timelines are two different timelines. So when we can bring those things into harmony like we did this year, that's amazing. It's really wonderful. It's no small feat. So on the subject of backstories, which is of course the theme of the biennial, this exhibition, in a very important way, is animated by Ansel Adams' backstory. It's about what made Adams, how he arrived at the iconic visual language that we know him so well for. And I suppose in homage to that, we decided to organize our comments tonight around the concept of backstory. So we have Ansel Adams' backstory, we have the backstory of our esteemed guest's research, and we also have another kind of backstory, which is about curatorial process. Don't go to sleep, it'll be interesting. So this is about questions and ideas that emerge when we curators get in the gallery and start shaping a checklist into relationships that exist in three-dimensional space. And something new always happens when you engage in that process. It's a privilege of the job. So before we do delve into our discussion tonight, I want to say thank you to our other exhibition sponsors, FEG, to ARP for their additional exhibition support. Thanks as well to the Ansel Adams Publishing Rights Trust for their collaboration. I want to express my personal gratitude to my colleagues at this museum, without whom none of this would be possible. Where you're sitting right now would not be possible, nor the exhibition upstairs. And last but not least, I want to take this opportunity to say what a pleasure it has been to work with the entire staff of the Center for Creative Photography on this project, and most especially the person that we're about to hear from, Dr. Rebecca Senf. It has been a treat for me to be welcomed into an Adams collection of such caliber and depth, and to learn what it is that I haven't known about Ansel Adams with someone as smart and collegial as Becky is. This has worked out very well for me, ultimately, so I'm glad you like the exhibition, but it's been a treat for me as well. So Dr. Rebecca Senf is the chief curator at the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson. This is an institution that many of you will know was co-founded by Ansel Adams in 1975, and that I often describe as a kind of photography mothership. I don't think that's probably in your PR packet, but it could be. You could use that term if you wanted to. So Dr. Senf is a leading contemporary Adams scholar. She has written, researched, and presented numerous exhibitions about Ansel Adams, as well as many other photographers along the spectrum of fame. And she has done that as a curator at institutions including the MFA Boston, the Phoenix Art Museum, and at the Center for Creative Photography. She is the originator of the exhibition that you've hopefully all at this point enjoyed upstairs, as well as the author of the companion book, Making a Photographer, the early work of Ansel Adams, which is an exhibition catalog, but really much more than that. It is a work of academic scholarship in the round. So Dr. Senf's CV is very long and very distinguished, and I would read you more of it, except that I would like you to actually hear from her today. So here's what's going to happen this evening. Becky will share a prepared presentation with you for about 20 minutes. Then she and I will sit down here in these seats and converse for about 20 minutes, or we will adjust that as necessary given the somewhat late start. And then we'll conclude with some time, about 10 minutes for audience questions. At 8 p.m., we're going to wrap up promptly, and I'm going to whisk Becky back over to the Great Hall where you had your reception, where she will be available to sign books until 8:30. So without further preamble, please help me welcome Dr. Rebecca Senf to the podium to share her thoughts from the Ansel Adams Archive.
what a warm welcome. Thank you so much. It's delightful to be here and to be able to talk with you all about Ansel Adams. I want to start by just adding my thanks. The Cincinnati Art Museum staff have been fabulous in every way, and it has been a tremendous pleasure to work with them. And of course, I need to thank Dr. Nathaniel Stein. You all know how lucky you are to have him here, right? Yes, good. He is such a smart and thoughtful colleague, and it has just been a pleasure to work with him on this show. His intention and his care in crafting the show has really been exceptional, so it's been quite a pleasure for me too. All right, let's get started. So what I'm doing in this talk is I have been the chief curator at the Center for Creative Photography for about 17 years. I've been working on Ansel Adams even longer, over 20 years, and what I wanted to do was share some of my favorite items from the Ansel Adams archive, which is housed at the Center for Creative Photography where I work. And for me, these archive items are the research materials. They're how I know what I know about Ansel Adams, and so I want to share that with you all and give you a sense of how I've learned all the things I have about Ansel Adams. Maybe not all the things I know about Ansel Adams, some of the things I know about Ansel Adams. So, all right, we're gonna get started. We're gonna start with Ansel Adams's 1916 photographic album, and that appears in the exhibition in a facsimile copy so that you all could handle it and touch it, which we aren't allowed to let you do with the original. But Ansel Adams came to Yosemite National Park in 1916 as a 14-year-old boy, as a tourist with his parents. He was an only child, and he asked his parents if they could go to Yosemite, and his doting parents obliged. They gave him a camera, and with that camera, he made photographs of Yosemite, and they're assembled into an album. And this album I consider a very special and rare document that's part of the Ansel Adams archive. And what it allows me as a scholar to do is to think about where Ansel Adams started. These are photographs where he's just beginning. He's working with a box Brownie camera, so a very rudimentary type of camera. And the photographs were developed in at Pillsbury's in the valley, so sort of drugstore equivalent printing. But then he took these snapshots back home, he assembled them into an album. The handwriting is his mother's, and he organized it according to the site in Yosemite. So all of these pictures are the Bridal Veil Falls pictures. Or in this case, these are all the Half Dome pictures. So what I can tell by looking at these is, for one, his amateur status. We see that, like, here, I don't know if this is somebody's sleeve that has ended up in the foreground of the picture, but he's really just learning how to use the camera. But I can also see that he's experimenting already. So we can see him moving Half Dome around the frame. In some cases, it's all the way to the right. In other cases, it's to the left. We see him experimenting with what he's putting in the foreground. In one case, it's Merced River. In another case, it's tents. In another case, it's somebody's sleeve. But he's experimenting with what he can do with the camera, with what composition looks like, with what framing looks like. So from the very beginning, he's working with both photography and this fascination with being in nature. And these things are very much intertwined. So this is a letter he's written home to his Aunt Mary that very first summer that he's in Yosemite. And I'm going to read you a little bit, and I'm going to start from right there. A couple of days ago, we went to Mirror Lake to see the sunrise. We then took the North Dome Trail up the Tenaya Canyon. It is a 21-mile trail, and we had the pleasure of walking about 1/4 of it. About 4 or 5 days ago, I went to the top of Yosemite Falls and Yosemite Point. I came back on fast time, covering 5 miles in 1 hour and 5 minutes. I have taken more than 85 good pictures. I have learned to swim and play pool and croquet. We expect to go to Glacier Point on Wednesday, either by the 11-mile trail or the Ledge Trail. We will go on the former on horses. Hoping that you are well and expecting to hear from you soon, I am Ansel Adams. So here he is, a 14-year-old, sharing this experience back with his Aunt Mary, and he's talking about both the miles he's covered, the things he's learning, and the pictures that he's made. He moves fast, so we've seen these early amateur pictures. About 2 years later, he's making this photograph. So we can see his composition has gotten much more sophisticated. His technical ability has just skyrocketed from those early pictures. So he really throws himself in and he develops quickly. And then a picture like this one from 1927 is about 11 years later. So we're already seeing elements of his mature stylistic characteristics of photography, although at this early point, they're not showing up consistently. So this is a bit of an outlier for this early moment, but we can see how far he's come very quickly. So this is where we start, and this is where the story of Ansel Adams starts. All right. Next, I want to talk about Ansel Adams's compass, which is also in the exhibition. And to me, it's really significant that Ansel Adams, when creating his archive, chose to give his compass as part of his photographic archive, right? If you kind of think about what that means, what did it mean to him? So for me, it signals how important mountaineering was. It was not just something he did. It really was something that formed who he was. You all have probably seen portraits like this of Ansel Adams, or like this, or like this. And these kinds of pictures give you the sense that he drove up to all of the things that he made photographs of. But of course, that is not true. You probably haven't seen as many portraits of him that look like this. Here he is in 1932. He's a 30-year-old. That's his Sierra Club cup on his belt, and he's out in the wilderness. Or a picture like this, where he's under a tarp out in the wilderness camping. Or a picture like this, where he's goofing around with his friends on a Sierra Club outing in the middle of a multi-week summer trip. And so these pictures, for me, really help demonstrate the camaraderie and the importance of these early social experiences in the wilderness, where he's having really transformative experiences. He's seeing the world in a different way, and that connection with nature, that experience of being days away from civilization really formed who he was. It means that when I look at a picture like this that he made, this thundercloud is not just an aesthetic form that he's combining with the mountain in the picture. This is a person who's sleeping outdoors. So that thundercloud is actually pretty relevant to what's going to happen to him over the next 24-hour period. So when I look at these early pictures, I'm thinking about him in this landscape, not just making photographs of it. And so all of that helps me think about the importance of this compass and that element of mountaineering and how it formed who he was, and that he would carry that understanding and connection to the wilderness through all of his work. All right, next I want to talk about his invoice for hours from the Department of Interior. So on the left, we're seeing a letter, and on the right, we're seeing the invoice that I'm talking about, and I'll talk about a little more about each of them. I'm going to read first from the letter. So on June 18th of 1941, Ansel Adams received a letter from the Department of Interior of the federal government. It says, "My dear Mr. Adams, Secretary Ickes asked me to have you come in and discuss with him the possibility of making one or more photographic murals to be placed in the Interior Department. He has the very beautiful screen, which you made some time ago in his office, and while we have quite a number of murals painted on the walls of our corridors, we would like to have some made by the photographic process." So you can see it's on Department of Interior letterhead. And when I imagine Ansel Adams receiving this letter, I sort of imagine him like doing a heel click and being thrilled that he's being invited to do work for the federal government. We have a picture. This is Secretary Ickes, so he was the Secretary of Interior, and this is that screen that is mentioned in the letter. So Ansel Adams had made a handful, we think there were maybe 13 total made, of these Japanese-style folding screens with his photographs decorating them. And when this one was in a show in Chicago and didn't sell, he had the idea to send it to Secretary Ickes, where it sat in his office and became a constant reminder of Ansel Adams's abilities, and eventually led to him being invited to do murals for the Department of Interior. Let's see. So Adams, the original letter mentions the opportunity of making one or more photo murals for the Department of Interior building. Adams never, I don't think for a minute, imagined he was going to make one mural. He thought this was the best invitation, and so he basically he upsold the Department of Interior and told them that really what he'd like to do is photograph all of the national parks, the Indian reservations, and the public works, things like Hoover Dam, all of which were under the Department of Interior. And they thought that that was a good idea. And so he came on as a photographer for the Department of Interior. And unfortunately, what happened was that in December of 1941, of course, we were bombed in Pearl Harbor, and the Department of Interior pulled back this job that Ansel Adams was doing. And the murals that they had invited him to make were never made. So Adams continued to photograph in the parks through the end of his contract, which ended in June of the next year, 1942. But the murals were never made during Adams's lifetime. But the project had inspired in him such excitement and such optimism about the importance of this project that he basically self-funded so he could continue doing work on it. He applied for a Guggenheim Foundation grant and received it for 2 consecutive years, which allowed him to keep photographing in the parks, and from that he produced a photographic portfolio, and this publication, which is pictured in the exhibition, included in the exhibition, and that allowed him to sell the portfolio at one price point, the book at a different price point, and to distribute that work quite widely. Let's see. Since the project was suspended and the murals were not made during his lifetime, during President Barack Obama's administration, they did eventually make these murals, and so they are now installed in the Department of Interior building. You can see them here in the hallways. I have 2 pictures of the Ansel Adams murals as they're installed. And then I want to come back to the invoice. So what the invoice tells me is that Adams is charging as little money to the federal government as he possibly could, which is kind of an interesting thought. You land this job with the federal government, you would think that some photographers might figure out how to charge them as much as possible for doing that work. But what we're seeing here is that Ansel Adams, for each day that he's working, is only charging a half a day of hours. And I really think that he was so delighted to be doing the work that what he wanted was to do the work. The money was incidental. And so Ansel Adams was a people pleaser, so he may have been trying to make it look as good as possible, but he really cared so much less about the money than getting to do the job. And so I love looking at this invoice and thinking about all the things that are going through his head and the way that his pride in getting to do the work really overruled the value of the money for him. Okay. For our last archive item, I want to talk about the Moonrise proof print. And in this case, what I'd like to do is read a passage from my book. So this is the final thing I'm going to do, and then Nathaniel and I will sit and have a conversation. By far, Adams's most famous photograph is Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico. Oft told, the story of its making is one of photographic legend. The creation of the Moonrise negative happened on a trip when he was accompanied by his son Michael and his friend Cedric Wright. So that's Michael all the way to the left, Cedric right in the middle, Ansel Adams all the way to the right. This is them packing the car for this big trip. And this, when he made Moonrise, is also the same trip that he made the national parks pictures. This is the first trip. And I should say, Michael, who I know, turned 90 this past year. Yeah. They had been making photographs without much success in the Chama River Valley near Georgia O'Keeffe's Ghost Ranch in northern New Mexico. Driving back to Santa Fe, Adams hastily responded to what he saw before him. Quote, "In the east, the moon was rising over distant clouds and snow peaks, and in the west, the late afternoon sun glanced over a south-flowing cloud bank and blazed a brilliant white upon the crosses in the church cemetery," end quote. With the sun setting, he knew he had to act fast. Swerving his station wagon to the side of the road, he commanded his son and Wright to help him set up his 8x10-inch view camera. Tripod, camera body, lens board, lens, dark cloth, loaded film holder, and light meter had to be pulled out and assembled before he could frame and focus the view, made all the more urgent by the rapid descent of the November sun. In the frantic hustle, the light meter could not be found. Evaluating the scene before him, Adams miraculously remembered the luminance of the full moon, 250 candles per square foot, and was able to approximate an exposure for the scene. He released the shutter and captured the clouds, moon, and mountains beyond the little town of Hernandez. Before he could make a second backup negative, the sun dipped below the horizon and the opportunity was gone. With that single negative, Adams preserved a view that has become a photographic icon. The image, at its core, exhibits many of his mature stylistic elements. The picture features a panoramic sweep of landscape and compellingly asserts that this perspective, with its precise arrangement of human edifice within a monumental and impressive environment, is the critical viewpoint for observing the scene. The drama comes, in part, from the relative scale of the elements. The endless quality of the sky reminds viewers of how small and seemingly insignificant we are in the expanse of the universe. All these visual qualities serve to inspire in the viewer a sense of awe in the face of a spectacular and unique visual experience, an appreciation for the natural scene, and a feeling of amazement. This slide compares his final print to his proof print. The proof print is a straight or unaltered printing from the negative with no darkroom work, such as dodging or burning, which would allow the manipulation of exposure to select areas of the print. As such, it affords a view of Hernandez that is much closer to the one Adams originally observed, albeit in black and white. From this view of the landscape, he envisioned, or to use his parlance, visualized, the finished artwork of Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico. Moonrise existed only in his imagination. He photographed a raw scene that he could transform in the darkroom into a symbol that would convey how he felt under a vast and beautiful New Mexico sky. By altering the relationship of the sky and the graveyard of the Hernandez Chapel to create a dark expanse over a shimmering village burial ground, Adams created from the raw material of the landscape an emotionally engaging image, one that borders on magic or mysticism. On that November day, Adams drew on more than 2 decades of wilderness exploration and photographic experience to create what would become his masterpiece. Deep and repeated contemplation had etched in him the value and meaning of immersing oneself in nature. Equally ingrained were lessons about making photographs that effectively convey an essential idea. Adams' early years had readied him for the scene he discovered along the highway as the sun set over northern New Mexico. Thank you. right.
Thank you so much for those amazing comments. And now that we've said nice things about each other, we can chat. Yes. So from you in your comments here and also upstairs in the gallery, we learned quite a lot about Ansel Adams as a young person, which, about those years between 1916 and Monolith, 1927. And for me, this was one of the big discoveries about working on the show in terms of my understanding of him as a person. It's almost like you never stop to think. He was young once. He became this person. He didn't sort of emerge fully formed. So that early life period really emerges as this kind of intense period of personal and artistic formation, and I've always been struck by how relatable that period of his life is. I mean, here he is, a kid with a Brownie camera. He's figuring out how to be an adult at a certain point in his late teens and early 20s. What kind of voice he will use in the world, whether that's through piano or through his photographs or even in his letters, right? How does he express himself? And one of the things that we kind of glommed onto when we were looking at the archives together, and which we tried to preserve in the exhibition, is if you look at that case in the front of the gallery, do read the letters, but also look at his handwriting. This is the years between, I think it was like 1920 to 1923. His handwriting changes entirely, right, from the handwriting of the sort of loopy handwriting of a teenager to something that he decided was the way that he wanted to write. And it's much more precise, much smaller, but it's also getting tighter, but it's also incredibly artistic, right? And I mean, I remember doing that when I was growing up, deciding what my handwriting would look like as an adult. That doesn't apply anymore because nobody can write anymore, but there was a time. So, there is that moment that we sort of work through in the beginning of the gallery about this intense moment of formation, and that's really important, I think, for this project to understand that. But then there's another apparent growth moment around 1930, the 1930s, so just after Monolith, where he meets Paul Strand. He is part of the early formation of the group F64, and we watch him start to digest modernism and what modernism is going to mean to him photographically speaking. And that is the second section of the exhibition upstairs, which we refer to as a transitional segment of his career. So we, in the gallery, decided to begin that section with this pairing of images, which I saw some people kind of cotton onto and pay attention to, which is lovely to see. So this pair of images really spans the 30s. So I think we might just start by talking a little bit about what do you see here? Reflect for us on the ways that he is digesting modernist ways of making pictures and thinking about pictures through this pair.
Yeah, I also want to mention that one of the things that came into play as we were putting this pair together is that originally the picture on the left, which has been used as a promotional image for the show, was part of a double hang with a picture over it, and I think this picture was under. And I came into the show and saw it and said, I think really we want to give this picture more attention. And so we moved it into the very first wall of that transitional phase gallery, and it suddenly opened up and kind of took on a weight that I think is really exciting. So I think in this pair, we watch Adams think more complexly about modernism, about form, and about shape. He's starting from a place where he's working with a landscape that is very experiential for him, but even in the Parmelian prints, he's interested in form. So he's organizing shapes and lines on the photographic paper from a really early phase. And we watch the importance of his experience of those places have different weight and meaning on the picture and the way that it's expressed. So when we look at the picture on the left, we actually see the wall that's on the edge of that viewpoint in the photograph. It's maybe hard to see because it's very tiny. It's right at the edge of the photograph, but it helps you stand there and imagine being in that particular location. Whereas the picture of the aspens is this screen that has a visual play with the information behind it and becomes very much a formal exercise. So we're seeing him relate to the landscape in different ways.
I think you already sort of pointed at this slightly, but I think one of the things you notice after going through that section and seeing the grappling with modernism is that, as you mentioned, it's not just happening there, right? He was already thinking in that way before he got to that period. And one of the things that happened for me in installing the show was looking at this picture after we talked about modernism and seeing it in a completely different way. We'll probably edit this part of the conversation and skip on to the next thing because of the time. But so the next kind of topic that I want to bring us to is to talk a little bit about the other big pull in the 30s. So modernism is not the only thing that's going on for him in the 30s, right? And I think this is one of the really important contributions of your research, as well as something that we address in the exhibition with, I think, an unusual amount of attention, which is his work for commercial purposes, essentially. So can you talk a little bit about Adams' commercial work in the 30s, particularly for the YPCCO, which is, you can explain what that is?
Yeah, I can.
And how you see that kind of impacting him as a photographer.
Yeah, I think that this is actually perhaps the most important scholarly contribution I've made to the understanding of Ansel Adams. So Adams, in his autobiography, which he writes at the very end of his life, he is very forthright about the fact that he did commercial work throughout his career. He's a photographer at a moment when there's no such job as photographer. And that meant that his whole life he had to hustle. If somebody offered to pay him to make a photograph, he took that job. It didn't matter whether that was a board president of a bank, or it was a product, or it was pictures of the University of California. But this job for the Yosemite Park and Curry Company, YPCCO, was one that he did for 8 years. And it was a perfect job for him. It was in Yosemite, and the marketing department of the YPCCO was trying to promote more tourists to come to Yosemite. So if you imagine, they're the ones who run the hotels, they're the ones who run the restaurants. If you have X number of hotel rooms, the only way you can make more money is to build more hotel rooms, or you can make sure that your hotel rooms are full as much of the year as possible. And so what Yosemite Park and Curry Company was trying to do was attract more winter visitors. They wanted people to come ski and ice skate and ride in dog sleds and all the wintry things you could do. So they hired Ansel Adams to make pictures of these winter activities to try and attract more people to come. And they used the pictures for all kinds of different purposes. They sent them as PR images with press releases to newspapers. They put them in brochures. They put them in store windows in San Francisco with displays of ski clothing that you could buy at that department store. I mean, like every possible way that they could invite people to come spend money in Yosemite, especially in the winter. So Adams spends this 8 years taking pictures in Yosemite, and what's so significant, and when I read the letters between Adams and his boss, Stanley Plum was the head of the marketing department. He's teaching Adams how to make photographs like a marketer. And this means it has to be simple, the message has to be so clear that no one could miss it, and it has to be emotional, because that's how you persuade people to change their behavior. So if you're trying to get someone to come vacation in the winter in Yosemite, you have to appeal to their sense of adventure or joy or family bonding time. And what hit me over the head as I was learning this is those are the characteristics that denote his mature artistic work. So here I'm learning that as he's working in this marketing job, he's learning the skills that he's going to go back and apply to his artwork. And that's going to transform his artwork into a totally new way of making pictures. And it's the way that we've all connected with him. It's the very characteristics that make his pictures so compelling to us now, even now, all these years later. So I feel like that discovery was really important. And Ansel Adams, while he acknowledged he'd made commercial work, I don't think he realized how much it had influenced his style. And so it took me, a historian, looking backwards through the evidence to put those pieces together.
Presumably, the YPCCO is also the entity you get in touch with if you want to pet a baby deer or get too close to bears.
That's right. That's right. Apparently, they figured out how to sell those experiences because that's the only things he took pictures of.
Right. Since you bring up the mature style and how this is such an important part of him getting there, let's talk about that a little bit. I spoke a little bit to our staff about this show a few days ago, and this was one of the points that I was making for our staff, is that when you get to this picture at the exhibition, hopefully you realize by that point you need everything that happened before in order to arrive at this. So you need that earnest and sensitive kid who's trying to figure out how to express himself. You need the musician. I mean, this is orchestral, right? You need that mountaineer who wants to convey his experiences. You need a professional who wants an audience. You need a technician. You need the modernist. You need, the ad man who knows how to make it all kind of punch. So let's talk a little bit about what is this mature style? How does it work?
Yeah, one of the things that surprised me when I went to write the book was that no one before had described what Ansel Adams's style was made up of, right? We all recognize an Ansel Adams picture when we see it, but no one had ever described what it was. And as an art historian, that's our job, is to describe what it is that we all know visually or intuitively and put it to words. So the four characteristics that I identified were a panoramic, sweeping vista, an omniscient point of view, so a godlike or a bird's eye perspective, and one that suggests that his view of the scene is the view of the scene. And we see that. People go back and try and recreate Ansel Adams's view because he chose the very best one and made it iconic. Another thing that he did that characterizes these mature works is the zone system. So how many of you out there are photographers and know what the zone system is? Oh, yeah, okay. I'm getting nods and hands. So it's this way of printing that includes everything from the bright white to the very blackest, deepest shadow, and then all of those grays in between. And so he really codifies this way of printing a photograph and making a negative as the way to make landscape pictures. So much so that probably some of you who make nature scenes use that style too. And then finally, his use of light and weather effects is what brings in the drama, and that's what creates that sense of awe. It creates a sense of temporal change. We know that those clouds aren't going to look like that 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, so it creates some urgency and some sense of something happening in the scene. And for those of you who are photo people, I'm going to contrast that for you with something like new topographics, where if you think about that bright sunlight, not a cloud in the sky, you get a kind of static quality in new topographics that was very intentionally contrasting with this way of Ansel Adams creating drama.
Thank you. I'm going to edit us on the fly here a little bit because I do want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit through some wonderful things to talk about and arrive here at our last question. So before I pose this question, I'll alert everyone in the audience. We will do a Q&A after this, so be formulating your questions, okay? So to sort of bring us home a little bit, since you mentioned the zone system, there has developed over the years, I'm going to observe this in a room that it might be somewhat a hostile environment to observe this in, but I'm going to go out on a limb and do it anyway. There's developed over the years the notion of Ansel Adams as a somewhat dogmatic figure, right? And I think as many people sort of nod when we talk about zone system, there are probably an equal number of people who think that is why I stopped making photographs, was the zone system. I don't like math. I don't want to figure out, how to do this. So one of the things that I think we decided to emphasize in the organization of the show, particularly as you move out onto the balcony of the gallery, is that in fact, sort of contra that idea of a dogmatic figure, Adams had a really profound lifelong openness to experiment, to new ideas, and to new tools, and was really interested in this salutary effect of newness in his own work. And I think this was a really interesting pairing that, again, we kind of came to in The Hang. So can you talk about this a little bit for us?
Yeah, and I just want to underscore your point. Ansel Adams dropped out of school when he was 12. He is completely self-taught, and he wasn't just a photographer, he was also a musician, but he was a chemist, he was an optician, right? He was thinking about optics and optical sciences. So all of that is something he's learning on his own. And so that idea of a kind of openness and a curiosity and a drive to understand things was intrinsic to who he was, and it's why he gets to be such a good photographer, because he learns from his experiences. When things don't go well, he shifts. When things go well, he moves towards that, and that's why we know him. So in this pair, Nathaniel and I had such a fun time. We put them together. They weren't originally, I don't think, intended to be together, but we were interested in the way that, contrary to that signature style that I talked about, where Ansel Adams puts something in the middle of the frame, these pictures both have this outward motion towards the edge of the frame. They both have a very activated edge, so things are happening all along the edge in a way that you don't see in a picture like Snake River and Tetons. And there's a kind of all-over quality and emphasis on texture and pattern, and these are not pictures that are like his signature style pictures. These are something very different. This is the 60s and 70s, and so Adams has not discovered the style and settled into it. Rather, he's still thinking about how to do pictures differently. What else can he do? What is a different way to compose a picture? What does he gain from doing something different? And so that was really exciting for us, and we actually wrote a label sitting right out there on the balcony to go with this pair, because it felt like a really important discovery that we made that we wanted to share with the audience.
Thank you for re-articulating that in this room. So we do have a little bit of time for questions, not as much as I had hoped for. I'm sorry about that. But I did want to say before we start that, I want everyone to know, because I know there are I see a lot of people in front of me who I know have stories about Ansel Adams, or their own encounter with him, teaching for him in some cases, being taught by him, etc. There will be a time for us to hear those stories, and we hope to record them. So on January 9th, you may have noticed in the gallery, we will be collecting oral histories. So if you are one of those folks who has such a story, please investigate that. There's information on our website, on the exhibition webpage, about how you can participate in that. We would love to hear your story, and Becky would love to record it and archive it, along with the Ansel Adams Archives at the Center for Creative Photography. Now, though, I would love to concentrate on questions rather than anecdotes, since we all have lots of them. So my colleague Emily has a microphone, and if anybody would like to pose a question to Becky, we could take them.
There's one over there.
Most photographers, is it on?
Yeah.
Most photographers have files that are just filled with negatives. What percentage of Ansel Adams prints have actually been printed?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question was, what percentage of Ansel Adams's negatives have actually been printed? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I was asked earlier today how many prints I think Ansel Adams made. The archive has about 2,000 different prints. I suspect that's half of what he printed, but I'm guessing that we have many, many thousands of negatives and all the different formats, from 35 millimeter to 8x10. So I don't know. That's a good question. I promise I'll look it up. I won't give a lecture again and not have the answer to that question.
I was curious about on Moonrise. How long did it take in the darkroom before he went from the scene that he saw and photographed to the image that he produced?
So I don't know. I don't know. I suspect that actually he was able to seize on how he would print Moonrise pretty quickly. I think that he looked at the scene and was already visualizing what it was going to look like as a print. And I suspect that because he describes that very experience when making Monolith, Face of Half Dome, that he stood there and realized how he needed to photograph it in order to get the print that he would ultimately make. So he's already thinking about the print as he's making the negative. That said, the early moonrise prints are much lighter in the sky. Some of you may have seen examples of those. I'm seeing some nodding heads. There aren't many proportionally of these ones with the lighter sky. Mostly you see ones like in the show with the very dark sky that comes all the way down to the horizon. But maybe it intensified over the course of his life, that he made that sky even darker, more dramatic, rather than the lighter sky that he did initially. So I think he leaned into that interpretation as he went.
Thank you. I've always been fascinated by this visualization concept that he operated out. Do you understand what kind of process happened in the beginning and how that may have evolved by the time the print actually happened? Did anything change, or did he replicate his imagination?
So, yes and no. I think he did imagine the finished print as he was making the exposure, especially as he gets more mature. That said, you've probably all heard this very famous quote from Adams, that the negative is like the musician's score and the print is like the performance. And so the CCP archive has 13 prints of Moonrise, for example. They're all different. They are all different. So even though you see in the exhibition his printing instructions, he just didn't feel obliged to make any print like he made the one before it. So I think on the one hand, as he's exposing the negative, he's thinking about the effect that he wants the final print to have, but he also allowed for the fact that as he printed it, he was going to have emotions on that day too, and that it was reasonable to let those emotions influence what that specific print looked like. So I think he was, as Nathaniel pointed out, not dogmatic. He really wanted to allow there to be some flex and flow and to be very human in his process. And so the negatives change. You know, we have lots of great examples in the archive of prints that he cropped one way initially and then cropped it differently later, or prints that he started making contact prints of and later enlarged, or prints where the dodging and burning is so radically different that, you know, anybody can see how he's playing with and experimenting with the printing process. So that's all pretty exciting. Emily, there was another question over here. Maybe our last one.
Yes, this may be our last question, so congratulations.
As Adams went into experimenting with color photography just later in his career, do you feel that as he was expanding the way he was doing composition in these later pictures, do you think that going into color had significant effect on the way he composed?
Well, that's an interesting question. Did his experiments with color influence the way he composed? I haven't thought about that before. That feels possible. I mean, I think that's an interesting hypothesis. Certainly, he was a master of that translation of a color scene in front of him into those zones of black and white. And, you know, when you're working with a view camera, everything is upside down and laterally reversed. So there is a kind of formal effect that kind of camera has on the way that you compose and create a photograph. Certainly photographing in color, because it adds that element of color, changes the way that the composition presents itself, because it is no longer just form and tone, but also the color that's impacting it. I don't know. I think that's a pretty interesting hypothesis. I do sort of wish in my imagination that he'd gotten to the point of inkjet printing. it's pretty fascinating to think about what it would have been like had he been able to control color prints the way that he could control black and white prints in the darkroom. He was always frustrated by color printing because he couldn't do it himself, and he didn't have the kind of specific, nuanced control over the product. And when I think about what photographers are able to do now with inkjet printing and the kind of specificity, if he'd had a career to play with that, I think we would have seen some really interesting products come out of that process. So yeah, I think that's a good hypothesis. I'm going to keep thinking about that. Thank you very much for your observation.
Right, so next book.
Next book, yeah.
Thank you, everybody. And I'll just remind everybody, I know you're all going to want to talk to Becky afterwards. I'm gonna whisk her over to the tables in the Great Hall where you can have a chance to meet her further. Thank you very much.